In recent years, Stoicism has been embraced by many in the tech world, so much so that it's sometimes become associated as kind of a tech bro philosophy. Regardless, though, of how Stoicism has been used or sometimes misused in Silicon Valley, it offers significant wisdom for us in such a time as this. As a former philosophy major, I should perhaps offer one caution up front. If you were to take a deep dive into the origins of Stoicism, you would find plenty of writing rooted in what we would find to be anachronistic cosmologies or strange syllogisms, these leaps of logic that would seem make little sense to us as modern readers. Yet alongside those dated ideas lies a deep well of practical wisdom that remains deeply relevant for us today. Our Unitarian forebear, Ralph Waldo Emerson, felt likewise about the Stoics, who he was a big fan of as well. He said explicitly, quote, "I do not bend myself to some particular one of the Stoic masters. I, too, have the right to form an opinion." What I take Emerson to mean is we don't have to be Stoic fundamentalists, not that any of you were considering that. When reading the Stoics, we are free to take what is helpful and leave the rest. And we should feel free to weave Stoic insights together with the wisdom of modern psychology, with Buddhist practices, and whatever else helps us in these hard times to live with greater calm, clarity, and compassion. So if this sermon does leave you curious to explore Stoicism more deeply, the best primary source to begin with is probably Meditations by the Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius. It's a collection of deeply personal reflections. It was not published in his lifetime. It wasn't written for a public audience, but as personal reminders to himself about how to live with wisdom and integrity. The modern translation by Gregory Hayes is especially readable and grounded, offering practical guidance for anyone seeking calm and courage and perspective in this turbulent world in which we find ourselves. Or if you prefer a modern introduction, this sermon was inspired when I read The Stoic Challenge, A Philosopher's Guide to Becoming Tougher, Calmer, and More Resilient, a quite small but really interesting book by William Irvine, who is an emeritus professor of philosophy at Wright State University, where he taught for more than 40 years before retiring. In this book, Irvine offers us a practical framework for applying Stoicism to the challenges of everyday life. His writing is clear, engaged, often humorous, making ancient wisdom feel surprisingly fresh and usable. Have any of you read any of his books? I see a hand or two. All right. And I'd be remiss if I failed to mention Ryan Holiday, who has done more than almost anyone to popularize Stoicism in our time. His books distill the core principles of Stoic thinkers into brief, practical reflections. His work is especially approachable if you're looking to weave Stoic insights into daily life, these kind of small, steady doses of wisdom about how to meet adversity with grace, gratitude, and purpose. I have pictured here his daily book of meditations, just one page each. I sometimes find, if you find one of these daily reading books that really resonates with you, I highly recommend you consider downloading it onto your phone as an audiobook. And whenever you kind of find yourself out in the world discombobulated, that's the moment to take literally a minute to listen, to queue up one of those and listen, and just, it can really be recentering, whether it's this or another. This one takes readings from Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, each paired with a modern reflection, kind of weaving together ancient wisdom and contemporary challenge. Or if you prefer a simple, single sustained narrative, I think the best place to start with that, with Holiday's books, is his The Obstacle is the Way, The Ancient Art of Turning Adversity to Advantage. But enough preamble, let's turn now to how can we apply the wisdom of these ancient Stoics to our lives today to help us cultivate calm in the midst of life's inevitable storms. To make this more concrete, let me start with a specific example of what does it look like to turn the obstacle into the way. Isn't the obstacle the obstacle? Now, how do we make the obstacle the way? Imagine you're at an airport. You're waiting to board a connecting flight. If possible, don't do that right now, but that's... But anyway, you're there, you hear the dreaded announcement. your plane has been delayed due to weather. At first, it's optimistic. Oh, it's only been delayed by an hour. But then 1 hour turns into 2, and then the hours just keep slipping by. The plane eventually arrives, and then it's too late. The crew is exhausted. We can't delay until morning until we have a fresh flight clue. So we will pay for an overnight hotel room for you, and a collective groan goes up from the weary travelers. Who's been there? I have, yeah. I invite you to remember your reaction in that moment or moments when that has happened to you. Were you overjoyed? No. So the philosophy professor I mentioned earlier admits that when he faced a similar travel debacle, his first reaction was to groan right along with the chorus of his fellow travelers. But then he caught himself and thought, wait a second, I'm supposed to be this world-renowned expert on Stoicism. How could this wisdom help me right now in my everyday life? So he decided, what if I imagine that this setback has been designed by the Stoic gods to test my resilience and resourcefulness? He was quick to clarify that, at least for him, he doesn't believe the Stoic gods actually exist, but he's found that this thought experiment of invoking these fictional entities can transform what many people would find just an unfortunate setback into a kind of interesting mind game. He said this mental shift, reframing the situation as a test, allowed him to stop groaning, and instead of becoming increasingly frustrated and angry and despondent, he found himself saying, "Game on, Stoic gods." Can you feel what that shift might feel like within yourself, from like, I'm just being put upon, to like, game on? The situation itself had not changed one iota, but you can shout every curse word you know. You can punch a wall in anger. You can curl up in the fetal position in despair, whatever your thing is. But no matter what you do, that airplane is not leaving until morning. So what if instead we treat this frustrating situation as a kind of game, a challenge from these imaginary Stoic gods to test just how resilient can you actually be in the face of adversity? Why we can't change the situation, we can control our mindset and our response. So here we come to one of the reasons that I find Stoicism so intriguing. It has some fascinating intersections with Buddhism. In Buddhist teaching, there's a parable known as the Two Arrows Sutra that's one of my favorites. The Buddha said that when we experience pain, it's as if we've been struck by an arrow. The first arrow is unavoidable. Whether or not we're enlightened, we can't stop painful and difficult things, sometimes even tragic things, from happening in our life and to those we love. It is simply part of being human. I think that's one of the most common misunderstandings about Buddhism. They think if I become enlightened, all my problems will go away. It's just not so. Indeed, we know from the historical record that the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, still experienced chronic back pain. He had to navigate quarrels between leaders in his community. He mourned the loss of beloved disciples who died before him, reminding us that spiritual awakening doesn't erase life's difficulties, but it does transform our capacity to meet and deal with them. And that's the point of the Two Arrows Sutra. The metaphorical second arrow and any additional arrows after that are often much more optional than we often realize. They're optional because we shoot them into ourselves with our reaction. They represent the suffering that we add. The Stoics would agree. We can't always avoid that first arrow that sometimes life slings our way, but we can learn to stop or fire less of those additional optional arrows at ourselves and at others who happen to be around us. Importantly, it is a huge success if you only shoot 5, 10, or 15 arrows into yourself and stop yourself at that point. Whenever you stop and manage to pause, here's the thing. That is an invitation to celebrate, not to shoot even more arrows into yourself for taking so long to wake up. Scolding yourself, it really doesn't help at that point. Again, you're just you're opting into even more arrows. Continuing to do that just starts the cycle all over again, and that's what we're trying to get off of that wheel. Let's continue with our story for another example. When Dr. Irvine finally reached the hotel, he headed off to what he assumed would be, at most, he was kind of calculating, at most I can get 4 hours of sleep before I've got to head back to the airport. Again, who's been there? Yeah. When he opened the door to that hotel room, beyond exhausted, ready to collapse into bed, he found a hotel room in complete disarray, and he just could not bring himself to sleep in a bed that looked the way that bed looked. He confesses, had I not been a Stoic at that point, who had already invoked game on Stoic gods, I would have broken into some supremely righteous anger. By thinking of it as part of a challenge from the Stoic gods, though, I had a rather different thought. What a clever wrinkle, Stoic gods. I didn't see this coming. Well played. So I retraced my steps back to the front desk and explained the situation to the clerk. Hadn't I gotten angry at him, everyone, including the clerk, would have understood. But would getting angry have been worth the price? Clearly not, if what I valued was my equanimity. It also helped me stay calm to think of the clerk not as a malicious person, but merely as a bit player in this challenge that the Stoic gods had devised for me. The clerk gave me the key for a room that he assured me ought to be clean, not particularly reassuring, but this prediction turned out to be correct. I got what sleep I could and went down in the early morning to board the shuttle that was taking us all back to the airport. It carried mostly familiar passengers from my canceled flight, and they spent most of the ride trying to top each other in their complaints about the airline. As I watched all this, I felt lucky about not sharing their disgruntled state of mind. So this experience reminds me of a question that Megan and I, really just for the past few months, and we've been married since 2007, have been asking ourselves lately. For many years, when one of us has a negative experience during the day, we would just kind of reflexively retell that story to one another in the evening, I think understandably. But recently, especially with an increasingly perceptive 2-year-old listening in to whatever we say, we've started pausing to ask ourselves, do I really want to retell this story? Does it actually serve anything? Or am I just giving more energy to this negative thing? Now, sometimes one of us needs advice or really needs space to process it, but other times we're just keeping the negativity alive, and it's better to just say, I'm just going to let this go and try to move on with my life. Here's another Stoic practice we can bring to bear on difficult experiences like the airplane story. Reframing them through perspective, specifically remembering how much harder other people have had it historically or have it today. Consider that modern commercial flights did not become widely accessible to the general public until the 1960s. Go back just a little further to the mid-19th century before modern transportation like the railway. And what we see as a miserable overnight delay would have seemed like an absolute miracle to our pretty recent ancestors. You mean you only have to sleep a few hours in a soft bed and you will be magically transported across the country? You know, like we don't have to do Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail? Anybody with me? All right. Dysentery, anyway. So this kind of comparative perspective can be deeply grounding and even empowering. This is another movement when it can be helpful to bring Buddhism into the conversation. Earlier, Irvine said that it wasn't worth getting angry at the hotel clerk if what he valued was his equanimity. In Buddhism, equanimity, and if you're interested in this, my Dharma talk during the middle hour, I'm going to go very deep into equanimity, especially what Thich Nhat Hanh said about how we should understand equanimity as inclusiveness. So if you want the part 2 of the sermon, stay after if you're able. In Buddhism, equanimity is known as one of the 4 Brahma-viharas, the 4 sublime states. The other 3 are loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy. These heart states expand our capacity for calm and connection and resilience amid life's storms. Thich Nhat Hanh, in particular, used to offer a particularly insightful and helpful translation. He said, you should actually translate the Pali word that we often translate as equanimity, we should translate it as inclusiveness. Part of what he meant is how much can be held? How much can you include before it starts toppling over? That's really how equanimous you are. Can this flight delay, can it be included in my field of experience without me losing my bleep? In the midst of this travel debacle, when I have at most a few precious hours of sleep ahead of me, can I include the frustration of having to ask for another hotel room in the middle of the night without losing my equanimity? Importantly, the takeaway here is not that we should ignore injustice or stop working to change broken systems. Rather, it is an invitation to notice, when am I simply shooting optional arrows of suffering into myself and not changing anything out in the world? Let me share a vivid example of how choosing not to shoot these optional arrows can make us still remarkably effective out in the world. Zoran Mandami's recent campaign for mayor of New York City, he faced intense and I would say often unfair and scurrilous attacks, and he met them with a smile and carried that composure all the way to victory. It is not that he never responded. He certainly offered his fair share of very smart and witty comebacks. But rarely have I seen a public figure face a relentless smear campaign with such a blend of warmth and grace and steadfast resolve. That is effective equanimity, responding from a place of wisdom and skillfulness instead of reactivity. To be sure, to address another common misconception, the Stoics were not advocates of getting rid of all your emotions. They certainly had nothing against positive feelings. They were all about delight and joy. But they did seek to minimize the number of negative emotions. Your mileage may vary on whether you want to do that, especially those they considered optional, the kind of self-inflicted suffering we've been exploring. If they could be fairly accused of anything, it might be eternal optimism. So that might not be everybody's jam. They did always seek to put a positive spin on life's events. Say you're stuck in a traffic jam. I'm sure that's never happened to any of you living in the DC metro area. A Stoic would say, it is just a waste of energy to get angry or despairing, because none of that will make the traffic move any further. You are stuck in that traffic jam no matter what. Instead, the Stoic reframe is to ask, how can I make the most of this unexpected situation? Game on, Stoic gods. Notice how it feels to shift from, I cannot believe I am stuck in this traffic jam. How does it feel to shift from that to, you know what? Now I can finally listen to that podcast I've been meaning to catch up on, or that audiobook I've been meaning to catch up on, or you know what? I've been meaning to call that friend for months now. Why don't I see if I can get them on the phone? Can you feel the difference in that shift? It's not that you would choose the traffic jam if you have a choice, but it's about focusing on what can you control and working on loosening and letting go around what is outside of your control. Without a Stoic intervention, you might understandably arrive at your destination angry, frustrated, ready to lash out at others. The Stoic driver, by contrast, is much more likely to arrive in a good mood, with the traffic jam reduced to nothing more than a small wrinkle in the fabric of their day. A Stoic might also remind us that as frustrating as being stuck in traffic can be, it's still better than being in the accident that caused the traffic jam. And that simple shift in perspective from resentment to gratitude for what you can still be grateful about can change the entire emotional texture of that present moment. I think the serenity prayer is actually pretty helpful here as well. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can. Do change the things you can, right? But the wisdom to know the difference. Some of you will also know the line, I am seeking to change the things I cannot stand, so that's important as well. So the next time life throws an unexpected wrench into your plans, I invite you to consider experimenting with one or more of these Stoic practices. Kind of keep them in your back pocket. They can help cultivate calm in the midst of life storms. You might smile and say, how does it feel to say, game on, Stoic gods? and see how that challenge calls forth your inner resilience. Or you may pause, take a deep breath, and ask, does my next reaction have any chance of changing this circumstance? Or am I simply shooting optional arrows into myself? And if so, what if I said, what if I opt out? What if I opt out? Just asking yourself, what if I opt out? Or perhaps you'll try reframing the situation. Remember how much harder others have had it or have it today, right now. Or noticing how this unexpected opportunity might be, what unexpected opportunity this event might be offering you.